Minister Christopher Pincher to move the motion to disagree with the Lords in their amendment 4L.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as I've said on a number of occasions at this dispatch box, I want to express my sincere thanks once again to all right honourable and honourable members for engaging in this important debate. And I'd like to repeat the message given by my noble friend, the Building and Safety Minister, in paying tribute to the fire and rescue services across our country. Because in recent days, we have seen large fires in Greater Manchester and Shropshire, and they've been dealt with in an exemplary and professional manner. And this is a reminder of why we want to get this bill onto the statute book, to help fire and rescue services do their job, to ensure that buildings are properly and thoroughly assessed. Madam Deputy Speaker, all of us in this House and in the other place agree in the strongest terms that residents have the right to be and feel safe in their homes. This government remains steadfast in its commitment to delivering the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 report's recommendations. The Fire Safety Bill is an important first step in our legislative programme delivering these recommendations. And I cannot stress enough, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I have reiterated on a number of occasions throughout the passage of this bill, the vital importance of this legislation and the ramifications if it fails as a result of outstanding remediation amendments. And that is why I beg to move that this House disagrees with the Lord's Amendment 4L. Without the Fire Safety Bill, legal ambiguity around the fire safety order will continue. Moreover, the updating of fire risk assessments to cover structure, external walls and flat entrance doors will be ignored by a number of negligent building owners. And fire and rescue services will lack the legal certainty to support enforcement decisions. That is a matter I know will be in the minds of members today, as it should also be in the minds of members of the other place. Now, a number of members across the House have said to me, well, why not simply redraft the bill? That might be easier to do with other legislation which already has careful cross-referencing to other acts, which already has detailed secondary legislation to revise regulations, but not so this small, nonetheless important bill. Redrafting it, even if the amendments were not defective, so that it carefully navigates the intricate web of contract law and does not fall foul of such acts beloved of members of this House, including many members of the opposition, such as the Human Rights Act, will take considerable time. And we don't have that time. Following our announcement in February, I'm pleased to say that hundreds of thousands of leaseholders will be protected from the cost of replacing unsafe cladding on their homes as part of our 5-point plan to end the cladding scandal once and for all, improve saleability of properties and restore confidence in the housing market. The measures, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we announced in February, including our work with RICS to reduce the need for EWS1 forms, our work with developers to put more of their own money on the table, additional to our tax and levy plans, our work with lenders to buy into our package of measures to ensure sensible and proportionate value is reascribed to homes valued at zero, will allow hundreds of thousands of homes to be sold, bought or remortgaged once again. And that will provide certainty to residents, to lenders, it will boost the housing market and it will reinstate the value of properties. All the amendments we've received undebated and already disposed of, simply will reignite uncertainty in the market and risk lenders once again turning to leaseholders saying, computer says no, we can't value your property. And I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I find it somewhat ironic that members who are flagging these issues in the context of trying to impede the progress of the bill, because having an up-to-date fire and risk assessment which considers the external wall system of a building should enable an insurer to take an informed and proportionate approach to risk, which considers not only the material and construction of the building, but the way it is managed. But I agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, that leaseholders need stronger avenues for redress. And the Building Safety Bill, which has already gone through pre-legislative scrutiny and which we're looking closely at as a result, will bring forward measures to do this, including making directors as well as companies liable for prosecution. And I agree that industry too must play its part, as I said to my right honourable friend, the member for North Somerset, who is in his place. Through our high-rise levy and developer tax, we'll make sure that developers with the broadest shoulders pay their way. And I should also, particularly as he's in his place, like to reiterate my comments made to him yesterday about forfeiture. It is a draconian measure that should only be used as a last resort. And we believe that this matter should be considered as part of our wider programme of leasehold reform, which we've already indicated we will bring forward. I also welcome his suggestion, again made in his speech yesterday, about the case study from Portishead in his constituency. And as I agreed yesterday, I think that we can make good use of that opportunity for assessing in-depth lessons learned about the system on the ground. So again, I'm grateful to him for his proposals. Madam Deputy Speaker, the safety of leaseholders and residents will be compromised if we do not ensure this bill is placed on the statute book by the end of this session. We won't help leaseholders, nor will we make homes any safer by impeding its passage. With respect to Amendment 4L, this amendment lacks clarity, just like the others. Just like the others, it prohibits all kinds of remediation costs from being passed on to leaseholders. And that means that were the costs to be even minor, as a result of wear and tear, or even where leaseholders themselves are responsible for damage, they would not be expected to pay. Now, I don't believe this House believes that that is a proportionate response.
Would the Minister allow me, please?
And I will, of course, give way to the Father of the House, as I was unable, due to time constraints, to give way to him yesterday.
I'm grateful, and I know that the Minister knows that this is trying to play the ball and not the person. The question isn't the small amounts, the question is the large amounts. As there are estimates that the cost of remediation may go up to 15 billion, the government are providing 5 billion. That leaves 10 billion, which may fall on the shoulders of leaseholders. And to move from a situation which may be ironic to some to ironic for more, the point of the amendments needs to be met by government and needs to be met in good time, or else many people will not be able to meet their demands for paying for the cost of remediation. And forfeiture will follow, because that will happen in a shorter timescale than the one that my right honourable friend was talking about from North Somerset.
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I certainly accept his assurances that he is playing the issue and not the man, as he always does. He has, as he rightly says, brought forward proposals to spend already £5.1 billion of public money on remediating the tallest buildings, as directed by the Hackett report and recommendations. We've also said, as a result of our tax on the development industry, which the Chancellor will begin a consultation on imminently, that we will raise a further £2 billion. We've also said that we'll introduce a tall buildings levy. Developers themselves are placing more money on the table. Taylor Wimpey has now placed 125 further millions on the table for remediation. Persimmon, 75 million. Bellway. The amounts are building up. We've also suggested a very, very advantageous financing scheme for those buildings below 18 metres, which will require or may require some remediation. Because I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, all members would agree that the taxpayer should not be paying for all and every cost associated with the provisions of the Fire Safety Bill. But that is the risk, because the scope of the amendments that have been tabled are far too broad to provide a sensible solution. The amendment is also unclear on who should take responsibility for remediation works until a statutory scheme is in place to pay the costs. That would result in all types of remediation being delayed, a really unsatisfactory outcome for leaseholders. Leaseholders also, I don't think, will thank us, Madam Deputy Speaker, for voting through an amendment that will generate litigation, lots of litigation, and that they may need to pay for it. The amendment would prevent the passing on of remediation costs, but it doesn't define what these costs are. That's a recipe for litigation, a recipe for delay. There's a lack of clarity on definition of what is remedial work and what may be attributable to the provisions in this Act or in other Acts or in none. So how would members suggest that we disaggregate between what legislation works are being carried out and what definition we use to differentiate between remediation, maintenance or improvement? It's a recipe for litigation, it's a recipe for delay. In effect, Madam Deputy Speaker, it may not be possible to relieve leaseholders and tenants from all costs for remedial works attributable to the bill without breaching subsidy control rules, a form of state aid. Further detailed consideration would be needed about that too. Practically speaking, drafting legislation, as many right honourable and honourable members will know, is a complex matter. A matter that cannot be dealt with in the timeframe proposed by the amendment, and to provide an arbitrary deadline, as stated, is neither helpful nor practical. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a common theme uniting these points. The amendments won't work. They won't help leaseholders. They're not detailed enough for a complex and intricate problem of this nature. We have seen the key elements of this amendment time and time again. And this House has voted them down time and time again. Yet time and time again, peers and the opposition, I trust unintentionally, seem set on re-injecting uncertainty into the market which cannot help leaseholders. So I respectfully ask the House to reject this amendment today, so we return a further clear and consistent message to the other place.
The question is that this House disagrees with the Lords in their Amendment 4L. Shadow Minister Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've had a lengthy speech from the Minister on this occasion, perhaps trying to ensure others have less time to speak. I am grateful that he took the intervention from the Father of the House on this occasion when he didn't yesterday, but unfortunately he didn't answer the main point, and therefore we must conclude that the Government is content for the £10 billion of additional cost to be shouldered by leaseholders. Madam Deputy Speaker, we find ourselves in an extraordinary position. We voted on this only yesterday, and in that debate, every single speaker, from the Conservatives, the Labour and the Lib Dem contributors pleaded with the government to support leaseholders. No one spoke in the government's favour, and the government's majority was halved in the vote. At what point, Madam Deputy Speaker, does the Minister question the sense of his approach? At what point does he turn round and think, well, all these people who have spoken are sensible and well-meaning, perhaps they have a point? At what point does he consider he might actually agree with us? Well, I suspect, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Minister has had those thoughts, and I suspect he even agrees with us. He knows that the Bank of England is worried about a crash directly caused by the crisis. He knows that hundreds of thousands of people are suffering. But he also knows that his Chancellor and his Prime Minister don't care enough to act. They have other priorities to their property and development donors. 14 separate companies and individuals with links to construction companies using the potential lethal ACM cladding on buildings have donated nearly £4 million to the Conservatives since 2006. The Prime Minister must have his new curtains. So they turn away from the screams for help for the people hit with extraordinary bills of £40,000, £50,000, £60,000. And the Minister has to bunker down, hold his nose and hold the line. I almost feel sorry for him. Can I just touch briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the arguments put by the Minister yesterday and today for not accepting these amendments? Because the argument that adding these amendments would cause further delay to implementing the Grenfell recommendations does not wash and is frankly insulting to the Grenfell survivors. As the member for Stevenage read out yesterday, Grenfell United has condemned the use and abuse of tragedy to put the blame on leaseholders. The government's excuse that amendments to protect leaseholders will delay Grenfell recommendations is, and I quote, deeply upsetting, wrong, and shows they'd rather protect the corporates responsible for paying for the mess they created. This argument against delaying the bill was put to us time and again when we were trying to add amendments to implement the Grenfell inquiry recommendations. At report stage, the Minister for Security said that accepting our amendment to implement Grenfell Phase 1 inquiry recommendations would create uncertainty. The Policing Minister later said it's not helpful, I have to say, for the House to keep returning to this issue. It causes confusion. But after continuously voting against our amendments, Mr. Speaker, the government eventually gave in and did make the concession in the other place. It was possible then, even after months of saying it wasn't, and it's possible now. And the audacity of the Minister to imply that supposed delays from new amendments will mean people will be less safe, as if people aren't already unsafe, living in buildings riddled with fire safety issues. Has the Minister forgotten that hundreds of thousands of people up and down the country are already stuck in unsafe buildings? So I will say this to the Minister again today. If the government hasn't managed to work out how to pursue the money from those responsible, why don't they do what's right and stop leaseholders from footing the bill now? Labour's amendment would buy the government time. They would protect leaseholders while the government comes up with a longer-term plan. Madam Deputy Speaker, as Lord Kennedy of Southwark said yesterday in the other place, it is unusual to be here again so soon, but this is an unprecedented crisis, and the government should be taking unprecedented measures to sort it out. The government knows hundreds of thousands of people are being forced to pay fire safety issues which are not their fault. The government should pay and then go after the building companies and developers who are responsible. Most MPs agree. 95% of all MPs and 92% of Tory MPs said developers who built the flats should pay to make them safe. We know that at some point, and this is the tragedy, we know that at some point the government is going to have to act to fix this problem. We know that the government cannot leave leaseholders to foot a £10 billion bill. And yet, yesterday, many Conservative members voted against amendments that protect leaseholders. What will they do today, Madam Deputy Speaker? Keep voting against their conscience, against their opinions, against the will of their constituents? Or will they do the right thing and vote to protect leaseholders? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a very short time for this debate, so I'm afraid we have to have a time limit of 3 minutes on backbench speeches. Royston Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I would just like to say that I've agreed with pretty much everything that the member for Croydon Central has said in these debates over the last few weeks, but I disagree fundamentally with bringing this political trope into it that the reason that the government won't act is because they're all in the pockets of the developers. That doesn't help this debate. It doesn't help us move it forward. And it doesn't help the leaseholders who you just keep putting in their mind there's some sort of conspiracy. So, sadly, I agree with you almost, with the Honourable Lady for almost everything, but certainly not on that. Madam Deputy Speaker, in yesterday's debate, and again repeated just a few moments ago from the dispatch box, the Minister said all of us in this House agree that residents deserve to be safe and to feel safe in their homes. He is correct. We all do agree on that. I think we will agree, at least the government, from the Prime Minister down, have repeatedly said they agree that leaseholders should not have to pay for historic fire defects. The Minister reminded us that this bill was introduced over a year ago. May I remind the Minister that me and my honourable friend, the member for Stevenage, tabled the McParland-Smith amendment nearly 5 months ago. He has repeatedly suggested that our amendments are defective, if he'd done so again today, but in the 5 months the government has done nothing to take our well-intentioned amendment and to incorporate it into the bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have less than 48 hours into the end of this parliamentary session. If the government and Minister agree that innocent leaseholders shouldn't pay, and if they are now concerned that they have run out of time, shouldn't they have attempted a compromise in the last 5 months since we tabled our amendment? Madam Deputy Speaker, noble lords from the other place have now done the government's work for them. They have found a mechanism to save the fire safety bill, which we all want, incidentally, and at the same time insert a requirement for the government to protect leaseholders from the crippling charges for defects that are not of their making. I can't repeat this endlessly enough, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is not of their making. We have repeatedly asked the government to compromise. They have not done so. This amendment allows them to do so now, even at the 11th hour, and finally secure the future of the bill and to protect those who have been begging the government for help. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will be supporting the Lord's amendment today, and I hope that the government and my colleagues on these benches too will do so. If they are serious about protecting innocent leaseholders and securing the bill, they will agree to the Lord's amendments or table their own in the other place before the end of the parliamentary session. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think everyone knows it is time to take the compromise.
Thank you. We now go by video link to Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister knows that this problem is not going to go away, and whether it's the fire safety bill today or the building safety bill in future, we will keep returning to this. And he knows that because what's been done so far is insufficient. He knows it because, as things stand, the length of time it's likely to take to sort this out will be too long for many leaseholders to be able to continue to bear the costs that they're paying at the moment and to contemplate the future costs that hang over them. And they know it because, as the government said right at the beginning of this crisis, and we intend to hold them to that promise, it's not right that leaseholders should be asked to bear the cost of something they weren't responsible for. And I really don't understand the Minister's argument. The uncertainty isn't caused by us in voting for the Lord's amendments. It is the unresolved problem that is causing huge uncertainty. And as for his point about drafting complexity, well, give a commitment to go away and draft something and bring it back in the building safety bill, because either the Minister's view is it's complex and no one's drafted anything suitable yet, go away and draft it, or it's simply a way of trying to resist the idea that leaseholders shouldn't have to pay. Now, in the meantime, I have a practical suggestion to make. All of those involved, including MPs, spend a lot of time going back and forth about practical problems in respect of blocks, difficulties, delays, lack of communication, and so forth. I've had to use parliamentary questions to try and find out what's been happening in respect of applications to the Building Safety Fund from particular blocks in my constituency, and I have to say the replies I've received have been distinctly unhelpful. Now, there are a very large range of people involved in this. Leaseholders, of course, freeholders, the fire service, managing agents, building companies, developers, chartered surveyors, local authorities, mortgage lenders, insurance companies, and of course his department. And I know that ministers and officials meet with individual groups and organisations regularly, but I think there would be great merit in bringing together representatives of all of these groups to establish, you can call it a contact group or an action group, so that he and his officials can sit round a table on a regular basis to share information about what's happening, progress chase, iron out problems, test out ideas, and find answers to the problems for which there is as yet no plan, but which my constituents in Leeds have to live with each and every day, and which weigh so heavily upon them and their lives and their sense of whether there's a future that they can look forward to, because as things stand at the moment, there isn't one. And I really hope ministers will take up the idea, and I really hope they will finally acknowledge that only a comprehensive plan is going to bring this nightmare to an end.
Thank you. Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And again, we all want the same thing. We want the protection of leaseholders from bills that they can't afford and shouldn't have been given. We want the protection of the taxpayers from a burden that they shouldn't have to carry. And we want the principle of polluter pays, so that the developers, the insurers, the builders who are responsible for the problems in the first place are the ones who have to pay for the costs of remediation. All of that has become perfectly clear over the number of debates that we've had on this. I welcome what my honourable friend said, both yesterday and today, about establishing a study on the ground, similar in some ways to that which the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central just mentioned, actually able to talk to real people about real bills and why it is that this huge sum of taxpayers' money that's been set aside isn't getting through to the people. What are the rate-limiting steps? What are the problems with the bureaucracy? What are the problems with the timescales that have been set that make it impossible for that money to get to the people who actually need it? So I very much welcome that. I hope it will be a short timescale and that the Minister will be able to share the lessons learned with all members on this. I also think that today the Minister has edged us towards the necessary compromise, because if we are willing to make clear that in the Queen's speech that leasehold reform will deal with the issue of forfeiture, it removes one of the biggest fears that there is. But as the Father of the House said, what about the time between that legislation passing and the potential for forfeiture to occur? That does need to be dealt with. But my honourable friend, if I may say, was clearer today than he was yesterday on that, and that is to be hugely welcomed. I've always thought the idea that we couldn't say what's going to be in the Queen's speech sits a bit oddly when we can read what's in the budget for the 3 days before it actually happens. I also welcome what my honourable friend today said about the Building Safety Bill and the scope of that bill and the ability to set out a concept of apportionment in that. Again, that is a major element going forward, and I hope that if we're able to take these concepts forward in the other place, we might actually get to a solution to this problem, because it seems to me that the building blocks of a solution are there. We all want, as my honourable friend said, and as all members on all sides of the House have said, certainty so that lenders can lend, so that property values can stabilise, and that homeowners, who are the very people that this party, my party, wants to encourage, can actually sleep soundly in their beds once again, as they have a right to do.
Yeah.
Tim Farron.
Deputy Speaker, I rise to support the Lord's amendments also. The amendment it's simple. It protects leaseholders. It prevents them from being charged crippling, life-changingly colossal bills to make safe properties that are only unsafe because of the actions of developers and a lack of government regulation. Here we are, the government has played to the final whistle here. It's down by the corner flag, keeping ball, feigning cramp in the hope the final whistle will go and we'll all move on. Can I assure the Minister that I want to be clear that we will, more importantly, encourage leaseholders who are anxious and distressed, that we will not give up, that we will not troop off the field not to play again once the 90 minutes are up, that we will come back next session and we will fight the corner of those leaseholders who currently face bills they can never, ever hope to be able to afford and that are not theirs to pay in the first place. Because this government's stance, as has been mentioned earlier, on this issue sets out starkly whose side they are on. They are on the side of the wealthy developers, some of whom do fund their party, They are on the side of negligent officials who allowed this to happen. They are not on your side if you are working hard to afford a roof above your head. This is a Britain, it would appear, where innocent householders have to pay to remove dangerous cladding while somebody else pays for the Prime Minister's new curtains. Madam Deputy Speaker, we believe in a better Britain, where there is justice, not crushing undeserved debt. So if we do not win today, then for the sake of leaseholders across this country, we will be back.
Thank you. We now go by video link to Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And so here we are again, debating the Fire Safety Bill and the Lord's amendments to it. The key issue here is not whether we enshrine in law the requirements on fire safety, but who actually ends up paying for it to be done. The reality is, as has been mentioned by the Father of the House, the £5.1 billion offered by the government thus far will be insufficient to cover the remediation costs and indeed the fire safety costs that are identified not only in tall buildings, but also in lower buildings as well. The issue then is that this is going to take some 5 years for the work to be carried out, and leaseholders are receiving bills now of £50,000 or more in order for the work to be carried out. They can ill afford it. The government is committed to produce the Building Safety Bill, but we know that that will be announced in the Queen's speech. It will probably take 18 months to 2 years before that's live and operational. Leaseholders do not have that luxury of that time. They're being charged the money right now. We still don't know the details of the forced loan scheme that the government is offering for leaseholders below 6 stories. We've been asking for that to scrutinise it so we can see whether it's fit for purpose or whether it will even work. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've had the honour and privilege of serving on the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee for the last 11 years. We are publishing a report on cladding and the other issues tomorrow. Obviously, I'm not allowed to pre-disclose what the details that are contained within it. I think it's fair to say, however, we are critical of the government in the way it's approaching this necessary means. I would urge my honourable friend, the Minister, who is a good friend, and I have every respect for him, let's have some commitments from the front bench in his answer to this debate on what he will do to ensure that leaseholders are prevented from having to bear the unnecessary and unacceptable costs. Let's have some commitments on when we will see the proposed forced loan scheme. Let's have some commitments on when we expect to see the Building Safety Bill brought into operation. And let's see some overall commitment to make sure that people who are living in unmortgageable, unsaleable flats are given appropriate comfort. Because frankly, without that, we have to support the Lord's Amendment to ensure that the government comes back with these proposals early in the new session. So let's make sure, as we send the message to leaseholders out there, you should not have to pay a penny piece to rectify the problems that are not your fault in the first place. So I shall be supporting the Lord's Amendment once again today.
Thank you. We now go to Barry Gardiner.
This bill has been passing backwards and forwards between the Lords and Commons because the government will not do the right thing and protect leaseholders from the ruinous costs of replacing cladding and remediating internal fire safety defects during construction. By refusing to do so, the government is making liars out of all those successive ministers and indeed a Prime Minister who have told this House that leaseholders should not pay for building defects for which they were not responsible. Today, I want to focus on the impact of EWS1 regulations and the callous way in which another operator, First Port, are treating vulnerable residents in Blackberry Court in my constituency. First Port have written to the 27 leaseholders in Blackberry Court, which is a 2-storey block of flats, to advise them that the fire safety work will cost over £20,000. They've not provided any breakdown of costs, nor issued a Section 20 notice, as they're legally obliged to do for any work costing more than £250 per leaseholder. What is most disturbing, though, is that they've been demanding access into the roof void through the only loft hatch, which is located in the bedroom of my constituent, who is an elderly lady of 94 years of age. Firstport would brook no objection to this until I intervened to forestall this intrusion and asked them to create a new access to the roof void from the common parts of the building. But the fact that they had not yet been able to access the void to survey it means they must already have been aware that there is no compartmentation in the roof space. Indeed, I've discovered that Blackberry Court, which was built in 2007, never got a building's completion certificate, despite being covered by the 2005 fire safety regulations. This begs the question of why they had not acted on this fire safety defect before. Some may suspect it's because the properties became unsaleable and devalued unless the work is done because of the EWS1 form now. The government did change the requirements for a form, but the minister knows the banks and mortgage lenders have not changed their stance, nor have the insurers. Charitably, EWS1 forms are the government's attempt to force a proper assessment of fire safety defects. Less charitably, they appear to be an attempt to outsource the crucial work of assessing dangerous buildings after Grenfell Tower to an unregulated private market. Currently, there is no requirement for a surveyor to hold a minimum qualification, professional registration, or certification as to their competence. Nothing to ensure a uniform approach as to how inspectors carry out checks. This means that in some cases, different EWS1 ratings are being given for the same block. According to government statistics, there are around 88,000 residential buildings taller than 11 metres in England, containing 1.2 million leasehold homes. The government has said there are currently just 212 chartered fire engineers across the UK registered with the Institution of Fire Engineers. This means that getting an EWS1 form is nigh on impossible, and in the meantime, leaseholders are left in economic limbo, unable to sell or move on with their lives. For my constituent at the age of 94, she simply wants to live out her life in peace and safety in the flat she bought over a decade ago. The government refusal to stop...
Order. I've given the honourable gentleman considerable leeway, but he has far exceeded the time allocated. So we must now go to Sir Robert Neill.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I shall be supporting the Lord's amendment today, with some regret, because I wish the government had moved to resolve this issue since we last debated it yesterday. It's disappointing that they have not done so. And I do that on the basis that I want the fire safety bill to proceed. I want it to be successful. The truth is, whilst the fundamental elements of the bill are worthy, it nonetheless has at present the effect of causing collateral damage to innocent leaseholders. Flies in the face of undertakings that the government itself has regularly given. And despite the huge sums of money that have already been put in, as is already apparent, that is not enough. And in the meantime, we have to have a scheme which protects leaseholders. And that's the absence of a provision in the bill to do that, which is the problem. If this amendment is not satisfactory to the government, then there is still time for them to produce their own. I very much hoped that the government would have acted upon the proposals in my right honourable friend and member for North Somerset's amendment tabled yesterday. That still offers a way forward. But absent that, at least the current amendment from the Lords gives a means of protection in the interim. At the present time, leaseholders in blocks like North Point in my constituency have properties which are unmortgageable. They cannot move, they cannot raise any more money on them. They have already expended tens of thousands of pounds in costs relating to waking watch and it greatly increased insurance claims. That is not satisfactory. At the present time, we need to have a provision which bridges the gap between us ultimately getting those responsible to pay. None of us who support these amendments want the taxpayer to be picking up a blank cheque. We want those who are responsible, who were at fault, to ultimately pick up the tab. But it will take some time to pin, if you like, the financial responsibility on those people. In the interim, we must have a means of protecting the innocent leaseholders. That bridging arrangement is something which only the government is able to do. And I would have hoped an acceptance of that together with commitments to move swiftly in legislation in this Queen's speech, was not an unreasonable thing to do. I must say, having served as a minister myself, I don't buy the proposition that it's beyond the resource of government to swiftly produce legislation that remedies the alleged defects that the minister sees in the current amendment and sits the bill in good order. There is still time to do that. And I really beseech the minister to reflect upon this and to come back with the government's own proposals in the other house before the end of this session. Robustness is a virtue, but when it turns into obduracy, it ceases to be a virtue. I don't want the government to get itself into that situation. There's still time, and this amendment buys them time to resolve that satisfaction. I urge the minister profoundly to listen to this.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow the Honourable Member for Bromley and Chislehurst, who I agree with the wholeheartedly in what he said, and indeed the comments of my honourable friend on the front bench and so many other members across this House. And I also support the Lords in their amendment, not least because of the suffering suffered by my own constituents in Cardiff South and Bath and so many others across the UK. And the Minister talks about uncertainty, but as so many honourable members and right honourable members have pointed out, it's uncertainty being caused by the failure of the government to engage with very reasonable proposals put forward on all sides of this House to provide certainty to the very leaseholders who've been affected. So the arguments that the Minister is making simply do not wash. Our leaseholders have been dealing with this for years. They've been dealing with the anxiety, the stress, the financial pressure, not least during the COVID pandemic over the last year. That has been intolerable for some of them, and I've met constituents who've been crying, have been in terrible state because of the situation that they have been left in. And I simply cannot understand the continued resistance of the government on this, not least given the cross-party pressure and support that there is across this House. And I want to thank the Welsh Government for their work in meeting with leaseholders in my own constituency, the Housing Minister Julie James, my colleague, Vaughan Gethin and so many others, the pressure that they've been putting on developers, the commitment that they've made to 32 million in the recent budget, the 10 million they've already committed, their active programme on leasehold reform, and, crucially, making clear, as the government here seems unwilling to do, that leaseholders should not have to foot the bill for fixing these fire and building safety defects. Of course, we all want to see the developers pay. We all want to see the resources come through for this. But the reality is we have to stand by and say clearly, once and for all, leaseholders should not be the ones paying for the remediation of this. It is not their fault. And I will continue to work closely with my constituency colleague Vaughan Gethin, with our local councillors and a range of residents and leasehold organisations on this issue. We are not going away, and some of the stories of how they've been affected have been told very, very passionately today in BBC Wales about the suffering, the anxiety and the pressures. But I want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have still yet to receive adequate response from the UK Government. They have left the Welsh Government in the dark, Welsh leaseholders in the dark on the way forward. And there is no need for this unless there is something to hide. Welsh Government officials, as the Minister knows, have worked constructively with his department on the passage of this bill and are working on a range of issues around the Building Safety Bill. Yet it took the Housing and Community Secretary over a month to respond to the Housing Minister in Wales over the crucial and very reasonable questions she was asking and an offer of cooperation. I've raised it with the Secretary of State for Wales, I've raised it with the Minister, I've raised it with others. And yet the letter that came back over a month later from the Housing Secretary said he's not able to confirm the details and timing of budgetary allocations to Wales, although he says the Barnett formula will, and I quote, apply to that funding in the usual way. But why can't he just give a clear an unequivocal answer on the money that will be available to Wales and how they will work with Welsh officials over the proposed new tax, over the new building levy, so we can finally provide some assurances to leaseholders in my constituency, but crucially across the whole of this country.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend from Cardiff South and Penarth, and also all of those honourable and right honourable members who have spoken since the Minister sat down. Government ministers, including the Prime Minister, have said in this House and in the other place on many occasions that leaseholders would not have to pay for the fire safety failures not of their making. So why does this government still disagree with the Lord's amendments? The Minister said yesterday and just now that the government doesn't have time to draft appropriate amendments to the bill in the way we seek. Yet the government has had 7 months since second reading and 5 months since third reading, plenty of time to try and sort out this matter. Madam Deputy Speaker, the safety scandal exposed by the Grenfell Tower fire affects up to 1.3 million flats in this country. Current And potential leaseholders, current leaseholders cannot sell, potential leaseholders cannot get new mortgages until they can prove the homes are safe. Insurance is impossible to come by. But worse than this, residents of these flats are living with the fear of being trapped in a fire in their home, and leaseholders live with the fear of unaffordable costs being imposed on them for the remediation. Madam Deputy Speaker, the human cost of this is incalculable. In my constituency alone, the Paragon estate, built by Berkeley Homes, about 70 homeowners, along with hundreds of assured tenants and students, were evacuated with a week's notice and cannot return. A fire raged up the cladding of Sperry House in the middle of Great West Quarter estate, built by Barrett's Homes. Leaseholders in at least 25 blocks in my constituency, built by volume house developers, face unknown costs. These include Waking Watch, replacing flammable cladding and wooden balconies, and most expensive of all, addressing the lack of fire breaks or proper compartmentalisation. The Building Safety Fund doesn't even cover the cost of the cladding across the country, let alone any of the other failures in these buildings, and it only provides loans for those sub-18-metre blocks. Nor does the Building Safety Fund support housing associations for the costs of rectifying the safety failures affecting the social rent flats they've found themselves responsible for through planning gain. So those associations are having to take the repair costs from the funds meant for building new social rent housing. Madam Deputy Speaker, unamended, this bill means leaseholders will be forced to pay. They shouldn't have to pay. They didn't design or build their flats. They don't own the flats, the building their flat is built in. In conclusion, this Parliament, with the support of this government, could take the burden from leaseholders now, but instead we're told we have to wait for a different bill whose content is unspecified, as is its timetable. This is unacceptable.
We now go by video link to Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've heard a lot recently about the Prime Minister's honesty and integrity. And it's important to our democracy that people can trust the word of their leaders. But this debate highlights it again because, as I reminded the House yesterday, on the 3rd of February, the Prime Minister told us that, quote, no leaseholder should have to pay for the unaffordable costs of fixing safety defects that they did not cause and are no fault of their own. It was a clear statement of policy, an unambiguous pledge to those who face ruin as a result of fire defects that are the responsibility of developers. And yet the Prime Minister has consistently whipped his members to oppose amendments to this bill which would honour his pledge. Now, I've listened carefully to the justifications from ministers for opposing the amendments tabled by the Honourable Member for Stevenage and by the Bishop of St Albans, and we heard them again yesterday. The Minister described the amendments as laudable in their intentions, but unworkable and an inappropriate means to resolve a problem as highly complex as this. And his ministerial colleague in the other place, the Minister for Building Safety, said it was, quote, the government's view that the bill is not the right legislation in which to deal with the remediation costs. So not the right amendment and not the right legislation. I thought the government should embrace this new amendment because it gives them the opportunity to draft their own proposals in separate legislation to honour the Prime Minister's promise to leaseholders. But the Minister claimed today that it will take time. The Honourable Member for Southampton Itchen rightly pointed out they've had time. 5 months since his amendment, 3 months since the Prime Minister's promise. If the Minister genuinely felt the objectives were laudable, he has had the time to come up with his own proposals. Those in the Metis Building, Wicker Riverside, Daisy Spring Works and others across my constituency deserve nothing less because they face bills up to £50,000 each, fix the mistakes of others. Unlike the Prime Minister, they don't have access to private donors. They face bankruptcy and ruin, trapped in homes that are unsafe and unsaleable, facing unbearable pressure and unimaginable mental strain. Deputy Speaker, we have to recognise our responsibility. The leaseholders have not just been let down by the developers, but by a flawed system of building inspections. They are, as I know ministers recognise, the victims of comprehensive regulatory failure. The government has to step in, urgently fix the faults, and then recover from those responsible.
Order. Again, I have allowed considerable leeway, but the honourable gentleman, I sort of don't understand when people are speaking from home, can they not see the time limit? I think that might well be the case, and perhaps someone would send a message back, because here in the chamber we can see the time limit, and I hope the honourable gentleman will appreciate that I have allowed him to exceed it. I had also put on a tight time limit because I had anticipated some vigorous debate and interventions. There hasn't been a single intervention, which leaves plenty of time for the Minister to answer the debate. Minister Christopher Pincher.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for that opportunity that you have provided to me. I'm sorry that I unfortunately have interposed on the time that the honourable member for Sheffield Central might otherwise have supposed to be his own. But he was making a careful and passionate speech, as have the other 9 right honourable and honourable members who have spoken from the backbenches today. I'm grateful for their insight and for their considered contributions. And I want to remind them, both houses, that this government understands the aims which underpin the objectives which have been sent to us over the last several weeks by the House of Lords. If I can address some of the points which were made in the debate, I thought my right honourable friend, the member for North Somerset, made a typically powerful and helpful speech. I agree with him. We want to help people get onto the housing ladder. That is a good Conservative principle. We also want to help them to stay on the housing ladder, and that is why we brought forward a package of measures which we believe, and which the lending sector tells us, will ensure that value, proper and sensible value, can be reascribed to properties so that people can get on with their lives. My honourable friend, the member for Harrow East, again asked a number of questions. He asked when the Building Safety Bill will be brought forward. My noble friend, the Building Safety Minister, is working on the feedback from the pre-legislative scrutiny process. He is also considering the secondary legislation that must sit alongside the primary legislation, and he will bring that bill forward as quickly as maybe in the next session. He also asked about the speed with which we will bring forward our tax on developers. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will begin his consultation on that process imminently. My honourable friend, the member for Southampton Itchen, who has been an honourable and doughty campaigner in his cause over the last several months, asked why it was that the government didn't bring forward proposals earlier. I have to say to him that the amendments that we received from the Lords, and indeed the amendment which for many months stood in his name, were defective, and that's why we weren't able to accept them. That's why we're not able to accept this particular amendment. The Honourable Lady, the Shadow Minister, made a number of points. I won't dignify the slur that she made on the integrity of the Conservative Party and our commitment to this cause, other than to remind her that any party which is owned lock, stock and barrel by the trades unions, any party that has within it such luminaries as Tony Blair or Lord Mandelson, gentlemen not unknown to the lobbying industry, should be very careful about throwing mud, because mud tends to stick on those that throw it. Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the points that the Honourable Lady made, and which was also raised in his speech yesterday by my honourable friend, the member for Stevenage, concerned why Grenfell Phase 1 recommendations might be delayed if the Fire Safety Bill does not reach the statute book in this session. I should like to remind him, her, and the Honourable Lady that the Fire Safety Bill puts beyond legal doubt the Fire Safety Order 2005 applies to external walls and flat entrance doors in multi-occupied residential dwellings. That certainty will enable the Secretary of State to make regulations with reduced risk of legal challenge, to place duties on the responsible persons regarding external wall structure and flat entrance doors as the inquiry recommended. Without this bill on the statute book, there would be significant legal risk of my right honourable friend making such orders, and that is why it is vital that this bill is placed on the statute book in order for us to use Article 24 of the Fire Safety Order to advance the recommendations of the Grenfell inquiry. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to place on record once again that this government is committed to protecting leaseholders and tenants from the costs of remediation as far as possible. This democratically elected House has voted unequivocally and decisively on 4 occasions. Shortly, we will be asked to vote for a 5th time. I urge the House to vote to reject these amendments, and I urge their lordships to listen to the will of this democratically elected House.